Welcome to Learning Aloud, a podcast from the Organizational Dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania, produced to inspire purposeful leadership practice and transform organizational experience. I am your host, Stephen G. Hart. My guest today is Geoffrey Irwin. Geoff has an interesting job as a change coordinator and situation manager at SAP. In this role, he combines both a grassroots and a top-down approach to improving his organization's adoption of external certificate requirements. He also helps facilitate the resolution of critical customer situations. Geoff's tech-forward mindset, combined with his experience in organizational development and change, operations leadership and consulting, enables him to advance complex projects towards operational and organizational efficiency with innovative results. His prior consulting experience includes diversity and inclusion initiatives, process management and process performance improvement, organizational alignment, global cross-functional team facilitation, and more. Geoff is a graduate of the Organizational Dynamics program here at the University of Pennsylvania. So welcome to the podcast, Geoff.
Thanks, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So given the introduction I just gave you, it sounds to me like much of your time is spent at SAP working what I would call the spaces between projects, people, and processes to try to bring things together in a meaningful way. Is that a good way to describe your job, and how does this work?
I think it's a better way to describe my career. Because I think about the the beginning of my career and doing assessments on technical projects and doing risk mitigation. And a lot of what I did there was bringing teams into a room that maybe were in that siloed area of a project. They had the blueprint. They knew what they were supposed to do. They were sent off into their individual directions. And then they kind of forgot to talk to each other. So, just simply the act of bringing them into a room together, you all of a sudden have that conversation of, wait a second, I didn't know we did it that way. That's why I'm having X problem.
Right.
So I definitely would agree with you there.
Right. So you also help people in your organization to adapt to change. I would say arguably that's one of the hardest things for people to do. So what have you learned about leading change in the workplace?
Yeah, I would agree that it's hard. I think one of the things that's been on my mind lately as I've tried to further my own growth in the area has been taking on mindsets like ADKAR. So being the
just explain ADKAR
desire. So you have the awareness that change is needed. You have the desire to make the change. You have the knowledge to make the change. You have the action or the ability to make the change. That's the word I was looking for. And then you reinforce making the change. So it's really just a process with which you go through, and you can't advance to one without the preceding step being fulfilled.
Right. So you think having that framework is useful for people to chart their journey through a change initiative?
Yeah, I'm starting to use it more in my own thinking and making sure that I'm checking all the boxes. In previous projects, I've kind of gone back and looked and realized I've actually been doing it. I just haven't been naming it.
Right.
And I think that in itself is helpful. I also think that it's critically important to find your influencers, because in a lot of cases, your leader isn't the person that's going to, you're not going to be able to get your leader aligned right away. So you may have to go off to somebody who is buddy or has a close relationship with that leader in order to actually get that leader on board and bring things together. I think so. Those are probably the two most critical things that I've started to learn.
Yeah.
Right. And reinforce into my own practice that have helped me.
Yeah, I think it's really important for change agents to be able to have those people of influence that you can work with to do that. So I mentioned in the introduction that you combine both a grassroots and a top-down approach in certain aspects of your work. And as I read that, it sounded like a classic polarity to me. So how do you handle this polarity and recognize which approach is needed in a given situation?
Yeah, it's tricky. I'll give an example. I'm working on a project right now, and you mentioned the focus on ISO certification, so International Standards Organization. Your company may have a certification that requires them to abide by certain regulations and follow certain processes and things like that. It's easy for an organization to just check the box on something like that. And it's not always the most exciting thing for people to get their minds around. So we have at SAP compliance coordinators in each of our business units, which is my role currently, that do this kind of work and trying to get the organization involved. Well, from a grassroots approach, what I've done is to globally bring those compliance coordinators together and simply bringing them into an MS Teams collaboration space, sharing the documentation that each of the regions has done, sharing the training materials, sharing helpful tips and tricks, things like that, creating a guide that people can use. And, just simply by doing that and a simple conference call to get people to know what was there, I was able to really kind of change a mindset in that group to say, hey, you know what, there's all this other stuff over here already. I can do this. It doesn't have to take a ton of my time. And maybe put a little bit more emphasis around it. There's another case where I had somebody just create take one of the templates that I had done and create something new out of it. So you started getting engagement right away. On the other hand, there's that top-down approach, and those are the cases where you don't necessarily have the clout you need in order to get something done.
Right.
Or you need leadership messaging for people to listen to it. And that's where you start to understand the difference between whether you're using that grassroots approach. How much can I effectively do on my own versus how much do I need a leader to step in and deliver that messaging, even if I write the messaging.
Right. Great approach. And, so I want to look back on your time here at the University of Pennsylvania just a bit. And I wonder, from the organizational dynamics perspective, what has stuck with you from your time here? And what are you using in your work today?
I'll give you two. I think the first is self-awareness. I took a class with Dana Kamenstein. It was a group dynamics course. And it was probably the hardest course that I took at Penn. Not because the material was hard. I got the material. But because it made me look inward. And it made me, recognize the places where I was maybe contributing to the results that weren't going so well. So it really helped me to start to take a little bit of a different look internally in order to change the results that I was getting and recognize those things where I might have some sort of a negative impact. And then I can adjust that along the way. The other is style switching. So when I was in the program, I was in an operations management role and I had a small team with me. I had somebody from the autism spectrum come in and become a team member in my team. And I recognized that I needed to work with that person differently. But the approach to working with that person wasn't the same approach to what I was going to use with my other team members. So I started to practice not just switching my style for that individual, but switching my style every time I had a meeting with one of my team members to work appropriately to the way that they worked. Have a conversation that met the way they worked. And style switching, you want both people to kind of come to the middle. But in the absence of that, one person coming to the table is better than none.
Yeah, that's great. Wonderful stuff. So I know that an area of great interest to you is looking at how people truly collaborate at work. So why does this topic interest you?
Yeah, my first class at Penn was virtual collaboration with Anna Reyes. And, because that was my first class, I started to want to integrate what I had learned in one class with the next class and the next class and the next class. So I started taking notes with hashtags of each class so that I could tie things together. And since virtual collaboration was my first class, that's the one that really got the most attention. And I started to base my papers around collaboration because the class just really kind of caught me and was a good fit for me, in part because of a lot of the things that I realized a lot of the things that I'd seen in my own work life had been collaboration problems. I mentioned earlier just bringing a few people into a room. That's a simple example. But, alignment issues within an organization, working on things like that, doing, other internal work where, you might have needed to get different team members from different knowledge bases involved. And it just helped me to better understand how that was all working. And from the virtual collaboration side, or as I like to say, distributed collaboration, because virtual makes us sound like we're out in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. I started to look at how my global teaming was working from a collaborative perspective.
Right. So you put all of this knowledge to great use.
Yes.
In the capstone that you developed. I think it's a wonderful model for achieving cross-organizational collaboration. So I want you to take a few minutes to describe what's inspired this and how does your model work?
Yeah, I think part of what inspired this was, to start kind of back, when I first started the capstone process, there was an opportunity to get a chapter in a book, and I started to write my capstone toward that. And at some point, that book kind of collapsed, and it didn't go through, so I needed a new topic. And I kind of fell back to those notes that I had, all those integrated things, and combined it with one of my other classes, systems thinking. And think about the system of what happens when we collaborate in a distributed manner. And so, what are all the different barriers that contribute to problems with collaboration? And so that's what I started to explore. And the end model is kind of questions that help diagnose the issue. So we really started to focus in on the diagnosis thereof.
Right. So let's just talk a little bit about the barriers then to collaboration that you've identified. You identified 4 of them: control, alignment, awareness, and network. Mm-hmm. So just briefly walk me through the diagnosis that you do or the questions that you ask around each of them. So for control, what might you do?
Yeah, so let's kind of take the case of you have a organization that's trying to move from several different business processes into one global business process. Common problem.
Pretty common, yes.
Right, especially when you're moving into a central ERP implementation. Coming from SAP, that's pretty familiar to me. So the business units kind of need to synthesize those processes. But they value their individuality. Mm-hmm. And so now this control piece, we start to talk about where are the barriers of control within the business. So in this particular example, you might ask questions in the realm of what rules within your organization could prevent collaboration? Or, how would the organization react to a disruptive problem? Is there a place in the organization or is there a mindset in the organization that they could come together and self-organize, using a systems thinking term, to get a problem resolved if they really needed to? If not, maybe there's a control barrier because there's leadership mechanisms in place that maybe prevent things like collaboration.
Right. So what about alignment? Another great point here is, the importance of having clear view and organized ability to do things in a cohesive way. So how do you look at alignment in this model?
Yeah, so are your business metrics aligned across organizations? Is organization A may have a particular metric that people are measured on. Organization B may have another metric. Now, they may lead the organization into the same goal at the end, but they might approach it differently because that metric forces them to. So are your metrics across your organizations aligned? And if not, is that going to result in fight or disagreement between those two organizations on how things actually should be done? And this is real life. This happens every day. In organizations, you don't even think about the fact that there's a metric there. So there's a level of awareness to understand these kinds of things.
Right. So awareness is the next one. And so this seems to be more the people side of things, the way I look at this thing. So talk us a little bit about the awareness barriers.
I think a lot about empathy in my line of work, and I think when we're empathetic to a certain situation, we can dispel, or maybe that's not the best word, but we can dissolve is the better word, issues before they really become issues.
Right.
So awareness is things like emotional and cultural intelligence. So is there that emotional and cultural intelligence to realize that you could have a problem? I'll give you an example. If you work with people in China to bring them to bring rotational resources into the U.S. for a particular period of time, and they come around January or February, is there anything in Chinese culture that happens around that time that could present a barrier? Yes, Chinese New Year. So if you structure the schedule of that rotation around Chinese New Year, maybe you get better results in the fulfillment of your rotation. So it's simple things, right? That just being aware of what's happening in another region so that you can get better results out of that collaboration.
Yeah, so maybe related to that, and which is the last barrier you identify in your model, is network. So talk to me a little bit about what the network barrier looks like.
Often we have problems in organizations where organization A has their own individual focus, organization B has their own individual focus, and they don't really talk to each other that often. And so when it comes time to collaborate with each other, they don't have the relationships there. So does your business have collaborative ties across different organizations? Some organizations do this by transferring different people for temporary assignments in different organizations. So I went, for example, from my current business unit to HR for a period of 9 months. And I have a network in HR now that I can leverage when I have issues. So your organization may not follow that particular model, but are there methods in place to generate that network?
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the practical application of this, so we understand a little bit more of the theory. And I'm assuming you've been using this in your current work. So what have you learned, and how has it been received, and what's the impact so far?
Yeah, so I think it would be rare for somebody to actually know that I'm using it because it's a diagnosis method.
Right. So it's very secretive.
Not secretive. It's just, you're in a meeting, for example. If I hear something that is a little bit off base and triggers in my mind that something that this could run into an issue later on, probing questions can be asked to dig down and then bring up the issue early.
Right.
The earlier and this is common across not just our organizational methods, but our IT implementations, the earlier that we recognize problems, the cheaper they are to resolve.
Right.
So I can have less business disruption by identifying the issue, for example, as soon as the project starts. And this is really a good reason why more organizations are moving into the change management space to try to better integrate it with their PMOs.
Right.
Because the earlier that you bring in change, the better option that you have.
Right. So it sounds to me like your critical role here is a careful facilitator using active listening, and you have in your mind a plan of action where you want to go, and you know what you're trying to listen for, and your job is really to try to emerge the best questions, issues of the moment, and get people on board with those things. Is that an accurate description of your approach to things?
In a lot of cases it is.
Yeah.
Even in, you mentioned the critical situation management. It's when I get into a situation where I'm trying to diagnose a critical situation, or let's say you can't sell right now. What's going on in the organization or in your system to be able to do that? Well, let's talk about what's the business process surrounding it. What's the impact? Because the impact can lead you to understand. Asking questions around the impact can help you to better understand why something is happening. You get by asking the right questions, you and in a indirect manner, you get answers that you might not otherwise, and you can continue to dig in your root cause analysis, tree of questions.
Right. So I know that you are a person who is constantly looking to learn and grow. So what are you looking forward to doing next?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, we talk about diagnosis. It's actually something I really enjoy doing, and I enjoy helping teams to helping facilitate teams to define their future. We live in a world of constant disruption. IT is a big factor in that, but it's not the only factor. So, how do we set our organization up for success to not run into those disruptive situations, to be thinking 20 years ahead, or even if it's 10 years ahead or 5 years ahead, so that our individual team or our organization doesn't get disrupted. I really want to focus on challenges that have a broad impact. And I think even things that make people's lives better in the long run. And that change management effort really kind of leads me to my end goal, let's say, a ways down the line. which is your job now, teaching in the university level.
Yeah.
And just because I think in that space you can have a broad impact on people and help develop that next generation of leaders.
Yeah. Well, Geoff, thank you for stopping by our studio today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And just I've been talking with Geoffrey Irwin from SAP. If you'd like to reach out to Geoff with questions or would like a copy of his cross-organizational collaboration model, I recommend you do so. You can find him on LinkedIn or send Geoff an email at girwin@sas.upenn.edu. Again, Geoff, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thanks for having me.